Hey everyone, and welcome to part 3 of the tier list series. In this episode, I'm going to be going through the alpha tiers. Low alpha, mid alpha, and high alpha. The mid tiers. This one will be longer than the previous couple videos, so just grab your popcorn and let's get started. Starting with low alpha. Allosaurus. See Tarbosaurus in the last episode, as most of what applies here applies to Tarbosaurus, applies here. Except this thing is just better. The only thing it's got that's worse is its crit chance. Otherwise, it's either the same or better. It's got more health, it's got more damage, and its impact is a shattering one. It is one of the best commons in the game, though. Amargocephalus. Recently got a little buff with the group disordering impact cooldown buff. Its base stats are horrendous except for the armor. The armor is really nice, but the base health, the damage, and the speed are awful. Its resistances really aren't any good, and its moveset is fine, I guess. Spear vulnerability is really good, and it's got spammable impacts and a shield. This counter doesn't really do that much, but yeah, I don't really like it, but it's not terrible. Aquilamimus. This one is one that I think is somewhat underrated. I've heard people say it's the worst hybrid in the game, and it is not even close to the worst hybrid in the game. But it is still bad. I just don't think it's the worst hybrid in the game, like people say. That said, it could use a lot from its ingredients that it doesn't have. Like, it could use Galley's damage, it can use Hoss Gen 2's health, it can use Galley's resistances, it can use Fearless Flap. So its health is bad, its damage is like mediocre, it's fast, but it only gets one resistance out of all these ones that Galley has. And its moveset's fine, it's just that group distraction sucks. Otherwise its moveset's okay. Evasive Rampage is good. I like Evasive Rampage, and Distracting Impact isn't too bad for it either, but Evasive Strike's not very good, and Group Distraction sucks. But yeah, it's kind of disappointing compared to what it could be. Arctidus. This was a newer one, added in 2.12. This is the bear, and also, a contender for the worst animation set in the game. I hate the bear's animation so much. It's just so out of sync and terrible. Like, there's only been one new animation type added since then, which is the Tiny Pterosaurus, but the Tiny Pterosaurus had so much better animations than the bears do. And then the flying lizards and the Archaeopteryx type things that were added just before the bears just had so much better animations. It's just ridiculous. Anyways, yeah, Arctidus, it's kind of weird. It's got pretty stats. It's got good resistances. And its moveset isn't very good though. Heavy Strike is quite mediocre. Overloading impacts fine, I guess, but could be better. And Defensive Edge sucks. It's not bad, but it is quite mediocre. It's not really a good rare. Arctops. This is a rare Gorgonopsid. This one's one of the better creatures in the tier. It's frail, very fast, and does good damage. It's got Distract and Crit Reduction Immune. And it's got just a cunning moveset. Revenge Distracting Strike is, admittedly, on this creature, it's really not that useful because most of the time when you're trying to revenge kill something, you're going to be using Rampage. But I guess it has its use for a turn too after the Rampage, just for a longer distraction. It's a very fast cunning that isn't too frail. Argentavis. This is the best non-hybrid eagle. Haas Maximus doesn't count. And the thing that differentiates this from the two Haas Eagle variants is that this thing is much tankier. And it's got a damage that's kind of in between the two Haas Eagle variants, and then it's got less speed. It's got a lot of resistances for some reason. Like, I don't know how it got these resistances. It's got the Swap Prevention Immune that the other two have, but it also has Crit Reduction Immune, Rend Resistance, Decel Resistance, and Stun Resistance. I have no idea how it got all those. And its moveset is... I would say its moveset is probably not quite as good as Haas. Oh, maybe it's better than Haas Gen 1s. It's probably about the same good moveset as Haas Gen 1s. It basically just cunning, distraction instead of cunning strike, and evasive impact instead of distracting impact. Yeah, that's Argentavis. It's a tanky cunning. It doesn't do that much damage, but it can last quite a while. Bumpy. This is an Angylosaurid, and it's one of the few unique character dinos in the like from the movie franchise or show franchise, whatever, from the Jurassic franchise. Um, it's got bog standard Ankylosaurid resistances, like Vulnemune and 50% D-Star resistances on basically every Ankylosaur you can think of, that or non-hybrid Ankylosaur you can think of. It's got basic Ankylosaur stats, kind of mid-ranging health and below average speed and pretty bad damage. It's got some armor, although its armor's not really very good for an Ankylosaur. And then its moveset's actually not too bad. Spear of Vulnerability's good, and Group Taunt and Shield Impact's also good, and Stunning Alert's fine. Its Invincibility Taunt, it doesn't really work for this one too much, but overall, it's not, it's still, it's a mediocre epic, definitely. Like, it's not a good epic at all, but I wouldn't call it a bad epic either. It has its use. Definitely better than Kylosaurus. Coelosaurus. A lot of people say this is the best common in the game. While I do say it's a good common, I don't think this is the best common in the game. Um, yeah, it's a flock. It's got pretty average health for a flock, although its damage output is pretty bad. In fact, it might even have the worst damage output for any flock. Its damage output is pretty bad. And its speed is pretty average, maybe a bit below average for a flock. Stun immunity is nice, and so is Swap Prevention Immune because it's a runner. And its moveset, really, in my opinion, is its main issue. Because these two moves, all you're going to be doing is just doing Distraction, Impact, and Run. You're not going to be doing any damage. And in the common only format, this might be the best common, I guess. Because it just spams swaps, like spam it with Strike Gen 2. But in a full format, I don't think this is the best common. And also, Alert the Flock is sometimes can be good, but generally I don't really think it's a very good move. Alert Roost is kind of mediocre. Yeah, but it is a flock, and it has good swap synergy, which is why I can't really put it lower than here. Dinokairos, another common. This one's definitely a revenge kill based common. It's frail, it has decent damage, and it is very fast. And its defining feature is Revenge Rampage. Basically, yeah, you bring it in, you kill something that's 2700 or less with the Rampage, and then you have another, you have a second Rampage up for whatever they bring in next. Do another 2700. So yeah, it's Revenge Rampage. It's really what most Revenge Rampage creatures are. In fact, there's another one later in this tier that we'll get to. Dinotherium. This is just Mammoth but better. It's got the same. It's got more resistances. It has the vulnerable resistance that Mammoth had, but it also has crit reduction, immune, and some distract resistance. It's got a bit less health and armor, so it's a bit less tanky. But it's got a little bit more base damage and a higher crit chance, and then its moveset's a bit different. So, it basically switches around its like slowing move and its damage buffing move. Superiority Strike and Ferocious Impact instead of what's it called? Persistent Ferocious Strike and Group Decelerating Impact. And honestly, Ferocious Impact is, in my opinion, one of the strongest moves in the game. So I think it benefits this. This thing is going to be doing like 2300 on turn 1, and then it's going to follow that up with another 1575 on turn 2. And Instant Rumble is basically just better than Bellow in most imaginable ways. The only way that it's worse, I think, is that it has a longer cooldown, because otherwise it still slows the opponent, and it still shields, but it also increases your crit chance by a little bit, and your damage by a little bit. Although, admittedly, you're not going to be using Instant Rumble much in this guy. You're mostly just going to be doing Ferocious Impact and then spamming Superiority Strike. Again, not really good, but definitely better than its epic counterpart. Dracorex Gen 2. Another common swapper, and I would say this is pretty close to being the best. I used to say it's probably tied for the best. And before that, I said it was the best, but now I think it's just barely the second best, just behind the best common swapper, which we'll get to in a little bit. So yeah, it's if you played this game back in the old days, like early 2019, you'll remember that this thing was an absolute nightmare in the lower tiers, just because it had a swap-in Shattering Rampage, which is just ridiculous. It doesn't have that anymore. Obviously, it has swap-in Savagery instead, but it is still a good swapper. It's got pretty low health, but it's got and speed, but it's got good base damage. You basically just what you do with this is you bring in swap in Savagery, preferably killing what you swapped into, and then whatever comes in next, you smack them with a Fierce Impact, and then you're probably gonna die. Yeah, it's a bread and butter Fierce swapper, and yeah, that's Dracorex Gen 2. It's a lot different from his Gen 1 variant, which is something you usually don't see. In fact, a prime example of two variants of the same creature being very similar to each other, we have the two Erlikosaurus. Erlikosaurus and Erlikosaurus Gen 2. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and use the toolbox's compare feature for these two. Because they are really similar. Their base stats are basically the same, except Erlikosaurus, the epic one, has a bit more damage. Their resistances are the same. They both have 50% bleed resistance. And their moveset is pretty similar. Although I think Gen 2 has the edge with the moveset here. In fact, let me turn on the details. I forgot Debilitating Distractions cooldown. Yeah, I would say Erlich Gen 2 slightly edges out Erlich Gen 1. Just because Debilitating Distraction is really good. It has a longer cooldown, but that's 75% distract. That's nice. And it only sacrifices a bit less damage. But they're both pretty average for their rarity. Yeah. There are basic speed up cunnings with precise rampage and some distract. Yeah. They're pretty basic though. Yeah. Anyways, next. Next, Fukuisaurus. This is a new one added in 2.13. And it's basically just a Montosaurus, but a lot better. It's got a bit less health than a Montosaurus, but a bit more speed and a bit more damage. It, of course, has resistances, and a Montosaurus doesn't, and Diesel Immune is nice on it. And its moveset is much better than Montosaurus' moveset. It has Group Cleansing Strike like a Montosaurus, but it has Grouper's Iron, in fact. While Montosaurus just has the regular one. And it has a better heal move. This is Shelter. So basically, it's a 2 times heal with, of course, a cleanse. And it increases your speed 30% for 2 turns. It also has a counter that increases your damage by 10% for just a little bit. So yeah, it's basically a straight upgrade of a Montosaurus. Most of the time, you're going to be going Group Resilient Impact on turn 1, and then maybe Group Cleansing Strike on turn 2, or maybe Shelter on turn 2, depending on how much damage you took. But yeah. It's still not a good rare, but it is the best non-hybrid Hadrosaur that isn't a legendary or an apex. Next, Gorgonops, the other Revenge Rampage creature I was talking about. This is also the other rare Gorgonopsid. I would say it's probably about the same in viability as Arctops. Depending on what day it is, I might say Gorgonops is better, and I might say Arctops is better. I don't know. They're basically tied. So, Gorgonops has a bit more health, but less less damage, and it's a bit more speed. It is incredibly fast. Same resistances, and its moveset is different. It's still got Distraction like Arctops, but it's got Cunning Impact and Revenge Rampage. This Revenge Rampage isn't near as deadly as that of Dinokairos, but Cunning Impact's a nice follow-up as well. But yeah, this thing annihilates Velociraptor. Like, if you ever have a problem with Velociraptors in your arena, just bring in Gorgonops. It's faster, and it one-shots Velociraptor. So yeah. Gorgonops, it's okay. It's an average rare. Gorgosaurus. This is a rare Chomper, a rare like Rex type Chomper, and it's really not very good either. It's got below average health for a Rex Chomper, below average base damage, and it is very slow. Diesel immunity would be good if it was not the slowest, like one of the slowest creatures in the game. It is tied for the slowest rare in the game. The only rare that's tied with is Argentinosaurus, and the only creatures that it's deliberately fast in are Uromotherium, which can speed itself up a lot, and Apatosaurus. And Apatosaurus is the only one where outside of Argentinosaurus where the decel immune is useful because they're both decelerating. But yeah. Decel immune does mean this thing is a lot better boosted than it is unboosted, but this is an unboosted tier list, so it's in low alpha. Its damage output, though, despite below average base damage for a Chomper, is pretty good because of Ferocious Strike. You just do Ferocious Strike and then chain it into Defense Shouting Impact for a lot of damage. But the problem is, with how many good cuttings there are, and with how relatively frail this thing is in relation to its relatives, it might really not survive to get that combo off. Interstansevia. Dang, all three non-hybrid Gorgonopsids are in the same tier. Yeah, this one's definitely the weakest, and it's a common. But it is. I still think it belongs in this tier. It's probably one of the weaker creatures in this tier, though. It has a lot more health than the other two, and its damage is kind of in between the two, and its speed is the least. Same resistances, and it's got Distraction or Revenge Impact. Its main bad thing about it is its moveset's not very good, but its stats are very good, especially for our cunning. Its base damage is quite average, its health is, for our cunning, really good, and it is fast. It's got really good matchups against other commons. It's just really good. It's a good common. It generally just does things right. Megalosuchus, we're on to another legendary, and we're on to a bad one at that. Megalosuchus is so bad. It's frail, its damage output's quite mediocre, and it's slow. Its resistances aren't bad, but they're really not too good either. Megalosuchus is just terrible. Okay. Yeah, its moveset's pretty bad, too. And its Group Cleansing Strike's really not too good. Group Frosty Strike is terrible, especially on a counterattacker. Fierce Impact's fine, but really doesn't work for this thing because Group Frosty Strike's the damage buff is going to be taken out by the counter rather than being used for the impact. And the heal really doesn't help it too much either. This thing is so hilariously bad, and yeah, Megalosuchus is trash. There's no way to say it isn't. I remember when 2.0 came out, people said this thing was better than Earldom, which is absolutely stupid. There is absolutely no way in hell that this thing would ever be better than Earldominus. But Myelania, the rare turtle. I remember back in the day when this thing was an absolute menace. Of course, not as much of a menace as its progenitor, the epic turtle, which we'll get to later in the video. But yeah, this thing is still a very good rare, and now it's quite mediocre per rare. Its health is low, but it has insanely high armor, which makes up for it. It's got bad damage, but like a really good turn 3. It's slow. It doesn't have any resistances like Carbon Emies has. And yeah, Lesser Emergency Heal sucks. There's no way to say it. Like, it's just Lesser Emergency Heal is just bad. Sphere Vulnerability and Devastation are the signature turtle moves. Really, most of the time, you just gotta be doing Spirit of Vulnerability twice, and then Devastation, which is a very good damage combo. Just anything that is remotely a chomper is going to delete this thing easily. Like, show this thing to, Acro or something, and this thing will not last more than 2 turns. No matter what you do with it. In fact, Acro's Rampage literally one-shots this thing from full health anyways. So yeah. Notopatosaurus, an epic hybrid. I'd say this is a bit better than the other tanky epic hybrid in the tier, which is a Margocephalus. So yeah, it's got much more health with a little bit less armor and more base damage, and it's a little bit faster, and it's got, in my opinion, a little bit better resistances because of the distract resistance. Resilient Strike, Group Distorting Strike. Group Distorting Strike is terrible, and Taunting Rampage, which is also terrible, but honestly, it's better than the Taunting Impact that this thing used to have. Yeah, really, most of the time you're going to be going Resilient Strike into Taunting Rampage for a 4,000 damage combo. Its moveset is honestly kind of bad, and its stats are quite mediocre, and so are its resistances. But it works better than, in my opinion, than a Margocephalus does. Just because it's tankier. And it's, of course, a tank, so that's what you want that for. Nundasukus. One of the best commons in the game, in my opinion. Despite being lower rarity, this thing is significantly better than Caprasuchus and Postosuchus. It's got... Its health isn't very good, but it's got good base damage, and it's really fast. 128 with Diesel Immune is great. And then its movesets may seem pretty basic, but its damage output is really nice. 4,500 in 2 turns is really good for a common. You're going to be Ferocious Strike plus Armor Piercing Strike. It's going to be 2250, and then the damage buff to Armor Piercing Strike also 2250, so it's going to two-shot a lot of good commons as well. This thing's just a beast. It's fast, it can't be slowed down, it does a lot of damage. This thing is just nice. Preondactylus. This one was just added in 2.14. Yeah. This thing is kind of overrated in my opinion. It's also cursed, if you can't tell. This thing is wildly cursed. It's the fastest creature in the game. It has 133 speed. And it's decel immune. Anyways, yeah, it's a flock. It has by far the least health out of any flock. Like, each flock member has 750 health, which is basically nothing. Its base damage is fine, but its multipliers are not. Instant Cunning Strike has a cooldown and Evasive Impact. It's not going to be doing much damage, which is the main reason why I think this thing kind of sucks. Well, it doesn't suck, but it's mediocre. And Side Flap really isn't too good, because on turn 4, you're literally forced to use Side Flap or swap out. So yeah. This thing's damage output kind of sucks. The swap in is basically just swap in dodge. There's literally no difference. Low Tide is basically just cautious on escape, and, just with a higher dodge chance. Yeah, it's a flock, and not a good one at that. Purasaurus. This is the C Purasaurus Gen 2. This is just its better version. It's got more health. It's got less base damage, but its overall damage output is higher. It's got the same speed, I think. It's got more armor. And it's got Ferocious Impact, which is the main defining factor of this. Most of the time, what you're going to be doing is Vulnerability Strike into Binding... Vulnerability Strike into Ferocious Impact, which is just a gigantic damage combo. In fact, let me calculate this real quick. Times 1.5 times 1.5 plus 1,000. So yeah, that 2-turn combo, 4375. That's a lot of damage. But yeah, and then you can do an extra 2250 after that by going Binding Impact. It's also got no escape, so good luck swapping out against this. Its main issue is that it is awful against things that can reduce its damage taken. Distractors aren't as bad for this thing because it has Ferocity. Unless, of course, the Distractor has Cunning Strike, in which case, bye-bye Ferocity. But against Dodgers and Shielders and things with high armor, this thing is not good at all. But if things don't have those damage-reducing things, then this thing will do pretty good against them. Skollosaurus. I said last episode that there were like 2 commons that were like Euprocephalus but better. Skollosaurus is the first one of those. The other one we'll get to later in the video. So, yeah, it's got more health but a bit less armor than Euprocephalus. It's got more damage and it's faster and it has decel. No, it's not faster, it's slower, but it has decel immune. It's got Sphere of Vulnerability and Taunting Rampage. So this set is like completely worse than Euprocephalus because it doesn't have a turn 1 rampage. But you're not going to be needing a turn 1 rampage too much anyways because you're going to be comboing it with Sphere of Vulnerability. Sphere of Vulnerability into Taunting Rampage at 4,000 in 2 turns. Yeah. Its main thing about the main thing of making it better than Euprocephalus is D-cell immune and more health, and then the extra damage output. But again, there is another better one we'll be getting to in a little while. Anyways, Sinoceratops. Triceratops, but better, really. Same health, a bit more armor, slower, and then it's got the same moveset except instant charge instead of greater stunning strike, which I would say is a bit better for Sinoceratops, just because it's better chance, it's priority, which I think is better than not priority. It kind of depends when it comes to stuns, but for a Ceratopsian, I think instant charge is better. And yeah, of course, like the other ones, if it didn't have swap and stunning strike, it'd be trash. So yeah. I still think it's quite overrated by people, though. But I did underrate it in the past. Sonorosaurus. This might be the worst creature in the tier. Sonorosaurus is not good at all. It doesn't have Dravityne or Brachiosaurus armor. It has less health than both of them. It doesn't have their crit chance. It doesn't have their stun or swap prevention resistance. And it's slower than both of them. And its moveset is really bad. Meter Resilient Counterattack is the redeeming factor of this thing. Otherwise, it sucks. Taunting Vulnerability is terrible. Taunting Vulnerability is absolute trash. And then Resilient Strike is fine. Devastation is good for dealing damage. But is it always going to get to use Devastation? Probably not, because this thing can't decelerate anymore. Why is it this weak? Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate. Yeah, it's just a disappointment compared to Giraffatitan and Brachiosaurus. Alright, Stegosaurus. This is definitely the outlier among the non-hybrid Pachycephalosaurs because this thing is a cunning. It says it's cunning fierce, but in reality it's pure cunning. It's also quite slow for a non-hybrid Pachycephalosaur, and it's got average damage and health for a non-hybrid Pachy. It's got Distract Immune and Crit Reduction Immune. And then Cunning Strike, Instant Charge, and Critical Impact. Most of the time you're going to be going Critical Impact into Instant Charge. And it's got Swap and Stun, which kind of sucks. But yeah, it does some damage, I guess. It's just, like, its moveset may seem flashy, but it really doesn't work too well, especially because it's quite slow. Not a bad epic, but not a good one either. There's not much more to say about it. Tanny! The thing that should be a cunning based on its animation type, but is in reality a fierce. I know it says it's a wild card, but it's a fierce. It's just, you can't say it's not a fierce. It's frail, it's fast, it does a lot of damage, it's Distract Immune, and it has a good moveset. Definite Strike's good, Null Impact's good. You're going to be doing a decent amount of damage with this guy, and then of course, you're really fast. I remember this thing used to kill Indoraptor back in the day. I don't think it does anymore, but it comes close. Not that that matters, because Indoraptor sucks. But yeah, it's just a fast fierce, is what really all this thing is. And yeah, not much more to say about it. Triceratops Option 2. This is the best common swapper. This is just barely ahead of Dry Correction, too. So it's got, again, basic Ceratopsian stats, but it has Rampage in its moveset, so it can follow up after Swap and Stunning Strike with a good hit. Swap and Stunning Strike into Rampage is 3,000. Honestly, I think that works pretty well for it. You're probably only going to get one swap off, though, unless you manage to kill something with the Rampage. But yeah. Overall, it's a really good common. It's a top 5 common, definitely. And the last of low alpha, Troodon. Troodon is, it's a raptor. It's the first of the epic raptors. There's one in the tier above, and then 2 in the tier above that. There are so many non-hybrid raptors. So yeah, this is the weakest of the epic raptors. It's very similar to the Dakota Raptor, which we'll get to near the end of the episode. Um, so it's got, I would say, above average health for a non-hybrid raptor, but below average damage and pretty average speed. Distract immune, and it's basically just a rampage spammer. Its damage output is pretty average for a raptor, I'd say. But it generally just doesn't have the oomph behind it that I would like from a raptor. That said, it is one of the strongest creatures in this tier. Anyways, mid alpha. Yeah, this is the smallest of the three tiers we're going over this video. High alpha has a lot of creatures in there. So yeah, let's just get started. Starting with Bahatonodon. This is another really weak legendary. It's a Hadrosaur, and it's a very stally one at that. It's got stun immunity, which is nice. And then it's got average Hadrosaur health, good base damage, although its multipliers suck, and it's slow. But this thing is a stalling god. And it also Resilient Strike with the vulnerability. It actually can hit kind of hard for a Hadrosaur. 3750 in 2 turns is good for a Hadrosaur. For a Hadrosaur that isn't an Rex or Hadros Lux, that is. So yeah. This is definitely a raid creature, of course. But people say it's the second worst legendary again. I've even heard people say it's worse than Schoolosaurus. That is not even remotely true. It is much better than Schoolosaurus, and I'd say it's probably the 5th worst legendary, I'd say, so it's barely in the bottom 5 legendaries. So yeah, it's still, of course, a terrible legendary. Don't delude yourself. Alright, Blue. This is the second of the 4 epic raptors. People say this is better than Pyroraptor, and it isn't. It just isn't, just because it's frail. It is by far the frailest of the epic raptors. Its health is terrible. Its damage output is also the least of the epic rap. Actually, no, I think it's the second least in 2 turns. But it is, I think, the least in 3 turns. I think. I don't know. But it is the fastest of the epic raptors, and it's also got stun immunity, which is nice. That would help against Woolly Rhino swaps if it wasn't incredibly frail. Precise Pounce is good, Evasive Impact's fine. Overall, it's not a bad epic, but I don't really think it's that good either. It is okay, though. It's an okay epic, but Pyroraptor and Dakota Raptor are better. Carbonemes. This is the epic turtle, and basically just the upgraded version of Myelania. Same health, more armor, less damage, less speed, but it actually has resistances. Really, the only one that matters is the stun resistance. And then it's got a very similar moveset, except Dig and Taunt is definitely better than Lesser Emergency Heal. So you're going to be surviving a lot longer with this than with Myelania because of the shield, and also it can speed itself up, which really negates the slightly less speed it has than Myelania. And that does a bit less damage, but honestly, you don't really need it as a turtle. So yeah. Overall, definitely not as good as its old self. God dang, its old self was ridiculous. Back in the old days of like 1.9, like 1.9, 1.10, 1.11, and 1.12, this thing was an absolute menace. It had the same 60% armor, but it had 4,020 health, meaning this thing had, back in those days, had the highest effective HP of any creature at that time, before that, and since. So the highest effective HP of anything ever in this game. And it still had 900 damage, but 104 speed. And it had bleed immunity. Seriously. And Spirit Vulnerability applied vulnerability before the attack, meaning it was basically an impact. This thing was so broken back in the day. And now it's a average epic. It's still quite annoying if you don't have a Fierce, though. Carnotaurus. This is a rare counterattacker. It has the best counterattack in the game. Greater Ending Counter is amazing. But its stats, again, aren't good. 3,600 health, 1,000 attack, 104 speed. The stats are terrible. Vulnerable Strike really isn't very good on a counterattacker. Tonic Shields is it's a shield, what do you expect? Hunting Impact, and then its defining feature is Greater Running Counter. And that's all you're really going to be using this thing for, is shaving off a third of your opponent's health every time you get hit. Unless, of course, they distract you, or dodge you, or have red resistance. Although, if they distract you, then you have Hunting Impact for that. But yeah, if it had, like, 4,200 health, it'd be high alpha, and possibly higher. But yeah, that's Carnotaurus. Concavenator, the other counterattacker in this tier. The other, like, theropod counterattacker in this tier. Because there's a sloth we'll get to a bit later. So, Conk, where are you? There you are. So it's got a better base stats across the board than Carno, and it's got a little resistance that really doesn't matter. And then its moveset's different. It's got Defense Shattering Counter, Defense Shattering Impact, Haunting Shields, and Resilient Strike. Overall, I'd say it's a little bit better than Carno. Emphasis on a little bit. Just because it's better stats and it's better base damage as well. So it's less over-reliant on them the enemy creature not having rend resistance. So yeah. Okay, Darwazopteryx. Darwaz is a swap-in bleeder. Now, look at this moveset for a few seconds and tell me if you think it's good or not. Yeah, its moveset is awful. This moveset is trash. Yeah, this is just a bad legendary. Bleed Immune doesn't really help it. Its stats aren't very good outside the speed, and its health is quite average. And its moveset is sucks. It's just bad. You're always going to be going Swap and Wound, and then Fierce Impact, and then Minor Swoop, but you're not going to survive that very much. Darwaz is just bad. Alright, Dilo. Dilo, that, even though it really doesn't count because that was completely different, the tournament, that was the single takedown tournament with rares, and yeah, this thing thoroughly impressed me in it. Dilo was actually my MVP in that tournament, but in a full environment, it's not quite that good, but it is still a pretty good rare. Its main thing is it is got above average health for a cunning, but it is a bit slower. Its damage output quite average, and it just spams distraction moves. My dogs are barking at something right now. Yeah, overall it's a pretty solid rare. And another one that ranks pretty similarly to it, in my opinion, is Dimetrodon. This one's a fierce. It's got average health, above average damage, and below average speed. It's got the same resistances as like Ophia and Dimegen do have. Its moveset's pretty not. Well, actually, its moveset's really not that good, but it's fine. It's a fine fierce moveset. Mostly you're gonna be going Defense Shouting Impact into Critical Impact, and then into Defense Shouting Impact again for some nice damage combos. So yeah, its main thing is it's just a basic fierce. But it's Jack of all trades, really, master of none among the fierce. But there are two better versions of this that we'll get to in high alpha. Enzilamoth. This is the fourth weakest legendary, in my opinion. This thing is bad. Enzilamoth is just Do I want to talk about the old Enzilamoth? Back when this thing was the second best creature in the game, back in 1.14. Yeah, this thing was broken back in the day. It had more health. It had 1,500 damage. It had Persistent Ferocious Strike, Mutual Fury. It had Defense Shouting Rampage. It had Bleed Immunity. It was just busted back then. So yeah, Persistent Ferocious Strike and Mutual Fury. You could do basically just increase your damage dramatically. Basically, double your damage, so that your impact that normally do 3,000, then did 6,000 damage with that rampage. Old Enzilamoth was unbelievably broken. It had ridiculous matchups. It was just stupidly OP. And now it's terrible. It's not as bad as it was right after it got nerfed to 2.0, because when it happened, it literally had like 3,300 health. It has since gotten some of its health back, but it still sucks. Its damage output's still pretty bad. In fact, literally, it's like double ferocity multiplier. It does exactly half the damage it did in 1.12 when it was added. Um, and its bellow is really not very good. The minor heal on its gate's fine, but it really doesn't work too well for Entolmoth here. Yeah, it's just a shell of its former self, and a really bad legendary. Aramotherium. This is in the argument for the best common in the game. Um, my personal opinion, it is, just for my personal use. Although Glyptodon is another contender. So yeah. Now you may look at the space stats and say, well, how would this thing be good? Its space stats are terrible. But it really comes down to its moveset. But first, its resistances. D-Cell Immune works very well with this because of Camouflage. Camouflage speeds itself up to where I think it literally makes it 133 speed when it speeds itself up once with Camouflage. And so unless you have something that removes speed increase, which would basically be resilient moves, then you're not going to be faster than this guy. And Camouflage also dodges and distracts, and it has no cooldown, and it's priority. And it has Cunning Rampage too, whenever you want to get some extra damage. And then it has a counter. So, this thing refuses to die unless you have a tank. That can, yeah, it refuses to die unless you have something that can counter its dodge and distract. This thing's really good. For a common. It's one of the best commons in the game, if not the best common in the game. And speaking of, Glyptodon. This is the, this is the ultimate common tank. It's better, it's of course the better version of Scolosaurus. Yeah, it is slower than Scolosaurus and it has less health, but it has more armor and it's got the same resistances, and then it has a better moveset with Resilient Rampage. Spirit Vulnerability into Resilient Rampage, so that's 4,000 damage, and then your next Spirit Vulnerability would do 1,500 instead of 1,000, like with Scolosaurus. So yeah, and also that Resilient Rampage, you can't really distract or dodge it. All you have to do is either have armor or shield, or be a block. That's all you can do to block its damage. But yeah, this thing, it beats Gorgotrabax. That's ridiculous. It beats an Apex, and a good Apex at that. So that's just a testament to how this thing is one of the most dominating commons out there. Kula Borginia! Yay, we got another trashy rare. Not rare, why did I say rare? Another trashy legendary. It's so bad. Yeah, it has a lot of health, and it's not too slow, but its damage output sucks, its resistances really aren't very good, and its moveset is just awful. Yeah, each of these moves on their own isn't too bad, but just together, and especially with how low this thing's base damage is, it does not work at all. Yeah. There's not much more that needs to be said, it's just trash. Alright, Megalogaya. Remember this thing was so good in 1.14? This thing was so fun. But yeah, Megalogaya, it's a shell of its former self, but really not too bad. It's an epic hybrid. It's a counterattacker one too. It's got below average health, and it's above average speed, and it's got counterattacker damage 1,000. It's got high decel resistance, which helps with how many freaking slows this thing has. This thing literally has 4 things on it that decelerate. And then it also has 3 things on it that shield. This thing is a shield and decel master. This is, unlike most Stegosauridae, this isn't a Stegosaurid, it's a deer. But yeah, it's a stalling counterattacker. Of course, a Chomper, any Fierce are gonna absolutely wreck this thing, because really its health isn't too good and it doesn't do too much damage outside of its counters. So yeah, Cunnings, they just fall to this thing, though. Another one that starts with Megalosaurus, which is also, yeah, I forgot about this, and I said Conch was the last of the theropod counterattackers in the tier. I forgot about Megalosaurus. Um, yeah, Megalosaurus is a good one. Um, I wouldn't say it's as good as Carno or Conch, but it's pretty close. It's got the highest health of the three, and it's got counterattacker base damage, and it's got counterattacker speed. It has distraction immune, which is pretty strange for a counterattacker. There's only strike, tonic shields, fortress strike, armor piercing counter. Fortress strike is the defining factor of this guy. Just so its counter is gonna be doing quite a bit of damage because of that ferocious strike. Otherwise, it's a counterattacker. Not much more needs to be said. Alright, Megatherium. This is basically just Andrew 0.5. As this thing is just Andrew Sarkis, but worse. Megatherium. It's tankier than Andrew Sarkis, and that's really all it has over it. It's got below average health, above average damage, slightly above average speed, very good crit chance, decel immune, and a admittedly kind of lackluster moveset. Arm piercing impact's pretty bad, running attack's not very good either. Soft Velocity is really the same way it's going to be getting some good damage on turn 1, but even then, I don't really think it works too good for it. And no escape. Yeah, if it had like Rending Takedown or something, then this would probably be almost as good as Andrew Sarkis, but yeah. In fact, we're not even going to be seeing Andrew Sarkis till next episode. That's how good Andrew Sarkis is. Ovilophosaurus. This thing was just buffed in 2.14. And it was a weird buff of that. But they buffed its speed from 125 to 127. And they gave it a bunch of resistances. They gave it decel immune. So it was the second creature to have decel immune and distract immune. And it also gave it 75% rend resistance and 50% stun resistance. It also has the broken impact with no cooldown. Not broken as in overpowered, but broken as in why. Group cunning impact. Why does it have no cooldown? They added it with Ophilos Moloch, which is this thing super hybrid in 2.11, and then they gave it no cooldown, and they just haven't given it a cooldown since, even though it really should. That's just dumb. And then in 2.14, they changed Cunning Impact to Group Cunning Impact on this. But yeah, it's weird. It's just weird. I'm not a big fan of this buff. They certainly made it better. It's nowhere near as bad as it used to be, but it's just too cursed for my taste. Oviraptor. Oviraptor is Ovilophosaurus' ingredient. Yeah, it's a, there's a series of 3 rare cunnings that are somewhat similar to each other, and this is the weakest of that series of 3. We'll get to 1 in high alpha and then 1 in low elite. So yeah, this one, it's frail, it's got pretty average damage, and it's fast. It's got distract immune. Devious Strike is good. I like Devious Strike. And then Sidestep is fine. Cunning Rampage. Yeah. Overall, it's a pretty solid rare. But there are, of course, better options. Alright, Pachycephalosaurus. In fact, this is right after Oviraptor in the alphabetical ordering. So yeah, Pachy, it's a average statted decelerating swap enabler. It's all of its stats except for its speed or average, and the speed is a little slightly above average, and I guess maybe the health is slightly below average. And its moveset is pretty good, honestly. Shielding Strike isn't really too good, but its Distorting Impact and Rampage and Run are good. Really all you can do with this is Distorting Impact, Injure, Rampage, and Run to swap enable. I never see this thing in tournaments, though, so yeah. Like, Renchenia. This is basically just Oviraptor, but better. But this isn't in the series of rare cunnings I was talking about, because of course this is an epic, not a rare. But it is literally just a better Oviraptor. And also a worse version of that rare, low elite cunning that we'll get to, Ornithomimus. So, it's got the same health as Oviraptor, more damage, same speed, same resistances. It still has Devious Strike and Sidestep, but it has Rampage and Run instead of Cunning Rampage, which is a side grade. Overall, it is very similar, but just better because mostly because of the extra damage. Smilodon, another epic cunning. This is basically just Pyroraptor Beta. Yeah, it is just a weaker Pyroraptor. It's got average cunning health, good damage, 129 speed. It faces strike besides pounce and prowl. Prowl is fine, but I don't really like it. In fact, I think it benefits Marsupial Lion more than it benefits Smilodon. But it has good turn 1. 3000 is nice for turn 1. So yeah, it's a cunning pouncer. Just good against dodge, but yeah, it is basic. Spinosaurus. It's a bleeder. And it's a pretty solid rare. So yeah, its base stats aren't very good. Its speed is the only base stat that isn't below average. But its moveset's pretty good. Fierce Strike's fine. Lethal Wound's nice, and Fierce Impact isn't too bad either. You usually go Lethal Wound into Fierce Impact as your 2-turn combo. And it's got no escape. So you're not going to be swapping out against this thing unless you got resistance to it, or until you kill it. But yeah, it's a basic Lethal Wound swap adventure. Stegoceratops, another swap-in Stunning Strike creature. Yeah, like with basically all the other Ceratopsians, this thing was a beast back in 2019 before 1.9, and then they destroyed it with 1.9. And now it's a completely mediocre epic hybrid. Yeah, it's got Ceratopsian stats, which means its stats are pretty bad. And its moveset outside of Swap and Stunning Strike isn't too impressive either. They did buff Group Distorting Impact by giving it a faster cooldown. But in general, it's just still not too good. I don't hate it, but I'm not going to be using it either. Just use Woolly Rhino if you want an epic swapper. Stingy Mohawk. Stiggy is basically, it's pretty similar to Packy. It's got less health, more damage, and it's faster. Still has Shielding Strike. It has Impact Run instead of Rampage Run. And it's got Instant Charge instead of Decelerating Impact. You only got one thing to do in turn 1, but after that, you're going to be doing pretty good. You got Shielding Strike into Instant Charge into Impact and Run, which will do quite a bit of damage. And with how fast it is, this thing's a pretty solid epic. T-Rex. This is your very basic chomper. Tyrannosaurus Rex. So yeah, it's got chomper health. It has tied for the second highest damage in the game. It is extremely slow. And it has just the fierce moveset. Fierce Strike, Fierce Impact, and Fierce Rampage. Like I said, the fierce moveset. Yeah, that's all there is really to this thing. And speaking of, T-Rex Gen 2, which is basically its weaker version. T-Rex Gen 2's only advantage over T-Rex is that it's a little bit faster, has 104 instead of 102. But it's got less health, less damage, less crit chance, and its moveset's just a straight downgrade. But yeah, another basic chomper. And finally, the last in mid-alpha, Velociraptor, which is the third best common in the game. It has the least health, by far, of any creature in the game. It is horrifically frail. But it's very fast, and it has good turn 1. And it's got Distraction Immune. So, yeah, it is a very basic moveset, and it is the definition of hit and then die. Yeah, that is really all you do with it. Is hit something and then die. Like, hit something really hard and then die. But yeah, there's a legendary that we'll get to later. That's my channel mascot right now that does this, but better. Anyways, now to High Alpha. This is one of the, in fact, it might be the most crowded tier in the list. Yeah, this is a very crowded tier. Yeah. The High Alpha is crowded, very. Anyways, let's get right to it. Starting with Acrocanthosaurus, which is the first non-hybrid alphabetically. It is the second best of the non-hybrid chompers. Mortem Rex doesn't count. Uh, it's tanky for a chomper, but it's got a little bit below average chomper damage and its chomper speed. Um, Group Cleansing Strike is pretty good for it, as it allows it to deal with some distraction, and then Fierce Impact and Fierce Rampage are standard chomper moves. Overall, one of the better creatures in this tier. In fact, it might be the best creature in the tier, maybe. Alanqua! This is like a fast, epic semi-tank. It's got average health, average damage, above average speed, and then Resilient Strike, Rampage, and Long Invincibility. Long Invincibility is good. Yeah, Long Invincibility, you're basically going to be, like, just not taking any damage unless they have Bleed or Defense Shatter. And then you have Rampage to deal some damage, and Swap Invincibility basically allows for a free swap. Yeah. Overall, it's a good epic. Allosaurus Gen 2, another epic non-hybrid. This is another chomper. It's really just in between Acro and Rex and viability. It's also one of the ingredients of my mascot. So it's got chomper health, chomper damage, chomper speed. Really good crit chance, though. And it also has really nice resistances. Really the only two that matter, though, are the bleed immune, and especially the swap prevention immune. As the swap prevention immune really lets it beat be able to do things against Androsarchus, by going Fierce Impact and then swapping to Holy Rhino, because that no escape from Androsarchus won't swap prevent you, because you have, pin immune. Rending Takedown isn't as good on it as Defense Shouting Rampage would be, because it's got such high base damage, but really its defining factor is its resistances. Plus, Cleansing Shattering Strike is good. Because Cleansing Shattering Strike, the only thing that's going to be reducing your damage is a Flock or a Dodge. Androtherium, the first tier of two Androsarchus hybrids that are also they're both also worse than Androsarchus. Anyways, this thing has below average health with 5% armor, which barely changes its effective HP. It's got slightly above average damage and slightly above average speed. A bunch of random resistances, except it doesn't have D-Cell immune like Androsarchus, which is disappointing. Group Cleansing Strike, Ferocious Strike, Group Warning Swirl, and Rending Attack, and no escape. Group Warning Swirl is basically, functionality-wise in PvP, it is literally the exact same as Instant Rumble, except I think it has a longer cooldown. No, it's got the same cooldown, never mind. And yeah. Most of the time you're going to be going Ferocious Strike into Rending Attack. Overall, this thing is, and it's a solid epic hybrid, but really not a very good epic hybrid. Anyways, moving on, Androtodon, the shark dog. You all know the memes. This thing is just horrendously ugly. It is my least favorite design in the game. But in PvP, it's not too bad. Now sure, it's relatively frail, although its effective rate is really not too bad. And it's relatively slow. And it does have, like, these two resistances are good, it's just, these are its only two resistances. Its main thing is that its turn 2 is ridiculous. It's usually going to go Cleansing Impact on turn 1, and then Rending Takedown. That Rending Takedown, because of its exposing counter, is going to do 90% of the opponent's health in damage. Just make sure that you're actually able to get to that point. But yeah, when this thing is added, people thought it'd be absolutely busted, but then it turned out to really not be that busted. So yeah. Anyways, Ankylocodon. This thing was just buffed. So yeah, it can now spam its impacts now because the group distorting impact cooldown buff. So it's got the standard synapses, not synapses because there's more than that. Sorry, standard Sphenacodon resistances. It's got 45% health. It's got above average health with some armor, but below average damage, and it's slow. And its damage output's pretty bad, but it can last quite a while, and it's got very consistent damage. It is not a burst damage creature. It's a consistent damage creature. Overall, it's really more of a tank than anything. Arctal Seas, another pretty bad legendary. This is Arctidus' hybrid, and Arctidus and Turbo Seas is hybrid actually, and it's the legendary ingredient of the first Apex hybrid to ever exist. Yeah, it's got below average health, below average damage, below average speed, a little bit of armor, and then it's got Resistances are decent, I guess. Diesel immune's nice, but the other ones really don't matter too much. And then its moveset is okay. Group defensive edge, it's not just like defensive edge. The defensive edge sucks, but this is basically functionality wise is in PvP. It's defensive edge, but it's also shielding, and I think it's got the same cooldown. Yeah. It's a shielding defensive edge basically. And then it's got starting it back. Shielded Heavy Strike, it's Shielded Heavy Strike. And it's got Dig In. So it will last a decent amount of time, I guess, but it's not going to be doing too much damage. Swap and Heal also kind of sucks, and Accelerated on Escape's okay, but really not very good. Overall, quite underwhelming. Baryonyx. This is the quintessential fast non-hybrid Fierce. It's got average health, above average damage, and it's quite fast with Decel Immune. And it's got Defense Shattering Strike, Group Takedown, Fierce Rampage. Group Takedown is trash. Don't even bother trying to use Group Takedown in this thing. All you're going to be using is Defense Shattering Strike and Fierce Rampage to do your damage. Yeah. Don't bother with increasing your own damage. The delay makes Group Takedown useless. So yeah, it's a fast Fierce. Yeah, there's not too much more to say about it. Dakota Knops. Oh yeah, that legendary that's basically about as good as its epic ingredient is. Yeah, it's got low health, average damage, and it's very fast. With Distraction Immune, and its moveset is kind of bad, honestly. Well, some of its moveset is. It could really use Precise Pounce instead of Precise Impact, and maybe Distracting Rampage instead of Distracting Impact, so that this thing could become a Rampage spammer like Sevia is. But no, Precise Impact sucks. Revenge Counting Rampage and Distracting Impact are fine, I guess. Really, it just lacks the general power and just versatility and stuff needed to be good. And speaking of its ingredient, next we have Dakota Raptor, which is the third of the epic non-hybrid raptors I'm going to be talking about. This one I'd say is tied for the best with Pyroraptor. I really don't know what to say which one's better. I used to say Pyroraptor's better, but now I'm kind of mixed. So I've got low health, average damage, and it's quite fast with Distract Immune. And again, this thing is going to do... Usually going to do Precise Pounce, then Distracting Rampage, and Precise Pounce, and then it can't really do anything on turn 4. Yeah, you're just going to be doing steady damage for 3 turns. Overall, this thing's pretty good. Yeah. Alright, Dioranosaurus. We have our next legendary raid creature. This one's a cunning. So it's got average health, good damage, and average speed. It's just its moveset is clearly geared for raids and not good for PvP at all. It's just got Cunning Strike, Cunning Impact, Lesser Group Heal, and Great Emergency Heal. You're not going to be doing much of this in PvP, which is why it's in this tier. It's a pretty bad legendary. Diplotator. We got a rather underrated rare hybrid here. And yeah, it is definitely a damage dealer. It's frail, got good base damage, and it's fast. And its main thing is its multipliers. Ferocious Strike into Defense Shutting Impact, that's a lot of damage. That's like over 5,000 in 2 turns. It's pretty nice. I like Diplotator. I fought boosted Diplotators like back in 2020, and they were the bane of my existence. Like, there's a Diplotator that 3-0 my team had like 2,000 base damage. Yeah. Have I ever told you that I've been in Aviary for over 2 years at this point? Like, it's so hard to get out of Aviary. Anyways, Dodo. The next flock on our list. And I think this is the only flock in the tier. Yeah. So it's got above average health for a flock with average damage, but it's the slowest flock. Um, it's got diesel immune, which is pretty nice. Flightless Strike is admittedly kind of bad. Protective Alert is not too good. Alert Decoy is nice, though. Alert Decoy does a lot of damage. 3,000 in a single hit. Um, but yeah, and so usually it's just going to be going maybe Protective Alert to impose Vulnerable, and then Alert Decoy to just smash them with a lot of damage, and then preferably run into a Swapper with that. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting flock, and it's not bad, but it's one of the on the weaker end of flocks. Alright, Doedicurus. This is basically somewhat similar to Glyptodon. It's got the same like animation type, it's the same type of creature. It's just its moveset's quite different. It's got more health, more damage, more speed, and more armor. Its base stats are better across the board. But it trades out Diesel Immune for a bit of Distract Resistance that's only useful for its Rampage. And it also doesn't have Spear of Vulnerability, it has Resilient Strike instead, and it has Accelerating Rampage instead of Resilient Rampage. It also has an excess shield, though. This thing is extremely tanky. Much more tanky than Glyptodon, and that shield helps, too. But yeah, this thing it's pretty good. Yeah, you're just gonna tank all the damage unless you're being faced with a Bleeder or a Chomper. Yeah. Mostly you're gonna just be switching between, Resilient Strike. You're probably gonna go Resilient Strike, then Decelerating Rampage, and then you're just gonna be switching between Shield and Rampage. It kind of depends on what you're facing, though. Edaphosaurus. This is one of those better Dimetrodons I was talking about. Although this one, why it's better than Dimetrodon, is a bit less obvious. So, it's got more health than Dimetrodon, but a lot less damage, and a little bit faster, and it's got some extra resistances on it. Its main thing is it's just, generally a bit more, just better statted, and its multipliers are better. So you're mostly going to be going Persistent First Strike into Fierce Rampage. You're not going to be using Fierce Impact much on this. But yeah, it's 4,500 at 2 turns. Yeah, I do think it's a bit overrated, but it's not bad. It's a good epic. Ionosuchus, the rare hybrid swapper. Still a shell compared to how it used to be back in 1.8, because this thing was amazing back in 1.8. But honestly, it's a good rare hybrid nowadays. It's got basic Ceratopsian stats, although it is pretty fast for a Ceratopsian. Not as fast as Monostegotops, but still. And then it's got Resilient Strike, Dig In, Greater Stunning Strike, Resilient Impact, Swap, and Stunning Strike. So, most of you are going to be going Resilient Impact after you swap in, and then probably Greater Stunning Strike after that, or Dig In if you want to survive. Yeah. There's a swapper, and a decent one at that. I do wish you had the old one back, though. That was fun those days. Elasmotherium. It's just Brontotherium on crack. More health, more damage, more armor, and then it has the same moveset, but with Taunting Rampage added and the swap in taken off. Taunting Rampage generally sucks, but Resilient Impact into Taunting Rampage is a good combo. Overall, it's a really good rare tank. Gigaspikosaur. This is a legendary sauropod, and one that is horrendously understated, and with a quite mediocre moveset. Why is its health this low? Both of its ingredients have a good amount more health in it, especially Margosaurus. Margosaurus has a lot more health, and Notapatosaurus has a decent bit more health, too. But yeah, it's also got its base stats are pretty, like, it's got average health with good armor. It's just for a sauropod, its health is terrible, and then its damage and speed aren't good either. It also completely lacks resistances, and its moveset is quite mediocre. Rampage, Short Defense, and Resilient Strike aren't too bad, and medium counterattack's nice. It's just Group Decelerating Strike sucks. Give it Group Decelerating Impact, and maybe give it Taunting Shields instead of Short Defense, and then give it some more health, like 4950, and then give it Notapad resistances, and this thing wouldn't be too bad of a legendary. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. So, Giraffe Titan is the next creature on the list. So yeah, it's basically just Brachiosaurus, but worse. It got a lot of health, but the other stats aren't too good. It's got good resistances, and then it's got Resilient Strike, Taunting Bellow, and Rampage. Swapito sucks, don't bother. Yeah, it's a tank with okay turn 1. Overall, not it's a good rare. Gorgosuchus. Gorgosuchus is an epic fierce hybrid, and it's a pretty decent one. It's got good health, low base damage, but its multipliers are good, and it's got slightly above average speed, and it's diesel immune. It's just gonna be going Group Frosty Strike into Fierce Rampage for 4,500 damage, and then Cleansing Impact for an additional cleansing 1,500. Not much more needs to be said. Glenken. This is the middle of the series of 3 non-hybrid rares that are similar. Yeah. Glenken's a good rare. It's got really good damage and it's extremely fast, although Bleed Immunity doesn't work too well for it. And then it's got Sidestep, Breaking Claws, and Evasive Strike, and Swap and Dodge. Really, it's a burst damage creature is really what this thing is. Overall, pretty good. It's a pretty good rare non-hybrid. Alright, Keratoporcus. We got another weak legendary. It is definitely better than Entilomoth, but it's still pretty weak. It's, speed, it's quite slow. It's got stun immunity, but outside of that, it's really not too astounding in the resistance area. It's somewhat tanky, and its damage output isn't too bad. It's just its moveset is so basic, it's painful. It can't really do anything to deal with Cunnings either. And against other Chompers, it's not really too good either. Overall, poor thing. I remember back in the day when it had Lethal Wound, Definite Rampage. Those are the good days. Mojondaboa. One of the most overrated creatures. Mojondaboa is heavily overrated. People have said this thing is mid-elite. No. This is being generous putting it in high alpha. This thing is horrendously overrated. Sure, it's got good resistances, and its moveset's good. But its stats are so bad. It is slow, it's frail. It has to take hits to deal damage like a counterattacker. Precise Impact's also not very good. Precise Rampage maybe be better. And then give it some more health. And give it a little bit more speed. Yeah, this thing is just overrated. People say it's really good because of Unescape Dust Cloud, but that's not enough to make this thing amazing. It's still a solid epic hybrid. It's just so overrated. Mostrops. Another rare tank. This one's a revenge killer. So yeah, good health, below average damage, below average speed. It's got the 2 best immunities in the game, and it's got a good moveset, all things considered. You're mostly just going to be spamming Revenge Distorting Impact and Precise Rampage. Yeah, you're not going to be doing too much more with this guy, just besides spamming those 2 and getting a very steady stream of damage off. Notopadotitan, one of the tankiest creatures in the game. This is definitely better than Gigaspikosaur, but still a weak legendary. It's got a lot of health and a lot of armor, but it's slow and it doesn't do much damage. It's got good resistances, though. Its moveset is just bad. Minor counterattack, it really doesn't do much. Taunting Shields is okay, Distorting Impact's okay, and Resilient Strike's okay. Taunting Bell not so much, but it generally just works together to not deal much damage. That said, it is basically a wall. Paramoloch, another hybrid Hadrosaur, and another weak legendary. Better than Bahato, but still a weak legendary. It is fast, and it's got Bahato's damage, although its total damage output isn't quite as good because it doesn't have vulnerability. But it's generally more versatile than Bahato, and it's got stun immunity and some distract resistance. Pretty average health. So group cleansing strike, lesser group heal, instant charge. Instant charge is pretty good on this thing, just to stun and stall some more, and group shield. But it's still not really any good. It's still a bad legendary. Post-Dimetrodon. This was buffed back in 2.11 to basically be a better version of Gorgosuchus. It's got the same health and more base damage and more speed and a lot more resistances. Its multipliers are less, but it still has the same 2-turn damage, Group Frosted Strike and Fierce Impact. And then instead of Cleansing Impact, it has a heal, so it's definitely more defensive, but it's faster. And really that speed is what makes the difference. Sure, there's not very many things in between them, but it can make the difference. Plus the heal is pretty nice too. And it's, of course, the resistances. Post-Rathomimus. Back in the day, this is the bane of existence in this game. Oh, I clicked posty again. Whoops. Remember back in 1.14 when this thing was horrendously annoying? Yeah, those are the days. But yeah, now it's worse than Ornithomimus. That said, I still think it's a bit underrated. It's still a pretty decent epic hybrid. It's frail and its speed isn't too good for a cunning, but it does a lot of damage and it's got good resistances. It's got cunning strike, distracting rampage, instant direction, evasive stance, null counter, swap and null. Swap and null is terrible. Don't bother with it. But null counter is alright, and it's a burst damage creature. Yeah. I remember back in the day though when it was immune and it had like 3600 health and 131 speed. Those are the days. Anyways, Taurus. Yeah. Overall, I also think this one's a bit underrated, and it's still a solid epic hybrid. It's a counterattacker and a pretty stally one at that. Its stats are pretty decent for a counterattacker. It's got above average speed for like a theropod counterattacker, and it's got good health. And then it also completely pulled instant distraction out of its ass. I don't know how it got that. But yeah. So basically, you just stall with this thing and get off counterattacks. It's also got no escape too. Overall, it's a decent epic hybrid, but there are of course better options out there. Pyroraptor. This is the last of the epic raptors. Yeah. This tied with the Cotoraptor in my opinion, but I do personally like this thing a bit more, just because its burst damage is fun. It has a lot of damage, like base damage, and a really good turn 1. And instant distraction's good. Good, basically just a get off me move against things that aren't distract resistant or aren't resilient. Overall, it's a fun raptor to use, and yeah, this was up until somewhat recently my go-to epic non-hybrid cunning. Pyratator. This is Pyroraptor's hybrid that is worse than it. In fact, they're at literally opposite ends of this tier, of the tier. Pyratator is at the very bottom of this tier. And the main reason for that is it is incredibly frail. 2550 is awful. And its damage output is pretty similar. Its moveset is so good. This moveset is great. Just give it 3450 health and maybe give it like some resistances from Irritator, and this thing would be great. But no, they have to keep its health terrible. It's so disappointing compared to what this thing could be. Scorpius Rex Gen 2. By far the weakest of the Scorpius Rexes. Also the weakest of the, like, 3 main hybrids, the Indoms, Indoraptors, and Scorpius Rexes. Yeah, its base stats are average to below average. It's got okay resistances, although much less than the other Scorpius Rexes. And its moveset's kind of bad. Coil Impact's good, and the Swap-In's good. But Strike and Run sucks. Strike and Run's awful. I don't like Strike and Run at all. Overall, it's pretty interesting to use, and it's mixed for me. Psychodonto. This is the other, like, better Dimetrodon. This one is the offensive one. Um, it's got less health, but it's got a lot more damage output. Or if you get back to Fierce Rampage, that's a lot of damage. Still got good resistances. Yeah, it's a Fierce, with a lot of resistances. Spinosaurus Gen 2. Very similar to the regular Spinosaurus. It just has a bit more health, and it has Cleansing Strike instead of Fierce Strike, which I would say is a little bit better. Overall, much of what can be said about Spinosaurus applies here. Spinotosuchus. This is Spinotoraptor's hybrid. Spinosaurus is better than Spinotoraptor, and Spinotosuchus is a little bit better than Spinosaurus. I remember back in 1.5, this is the best legendary and one of the best creatures in the game. Just because that was back during the bleed meta. Although we are kind of getting a bleed meta 2.0 at the top, because there's been a lot of new good bleeders. Like, we've got Forex, which doesn't really count too much, but Alberto Spinos, Spino Constrictor, Scorpius Rex Gen 3, Imperator Sucus, Refinantum. Yeah, there's a lot. So yeah, overall, below average health, low damage, really fast, and it's got just a very bleedy moveset. Yeah, it is just a shell of its former self. I miss the old one. The old one was fun. Titanoboa Gen 2. This is Magenta Boa's ingredient, and I would say they're probably about the same in viability. This one isn't quite as overrated as Magenta Sucus, although I still think it's a little bit overrated, Titanoboa Gen 2. It is nowhere near as good as the epic as Titanoboa Gen 1. So yeah. Decent health, low damage, average speed, good resistances. Precise Impact's kind of bad. I kind of wish they give it something else, like a decelerating impact from the other Titanoboa. But yeah, overall, it's a good rare. And lastly, Utah Sinoraptor. Utah Sinoraptor, I miss the old one. The old one had like 1600 damage and had like critical impact, so this thing, it did a lot of damage back in the day. Now its damage output is not very good. It still has instant charge, it's still decently versatile. I just miss its old damage. Overall, it is a pretty bad legendary. And that's it for part 3. Stay tuned for part 4, probably tomorrow. Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you want. And I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.